to be told through that summer's annuals. And there were actually a total of 12 DC annuals, which served as chapters in the body of Armageddon 2001. And this was actually a pretty neat idea. First off, having only 2 issues for the miniseries made it come across as something much more affordable, made something that felt much quicker. And because the main body was being told through the annuals, it meant that in terms of what was going on in the regular monthly titles, writers didn't have to put their storylines on hiatus. They weren't forced to come up with a story that tied in to the main event. They could just keep chugging along with what they were doing, and fans who weren't interested in following the story didn't have to say, oh, well, I've got to put off picking up my books for a month or 2, or, oh, I've got to put up with these chapters that are going to end up becoming dated in years' time. So I think that this came across as an act of goodwill by DC, that they were concentrating the story through the annuals. So it really, I think, acted as more of an incentive to the fans. Now, it would make the fans more inclined to pick up the annuals because they were saying, okay, well, now I'm making the choice to invest in the story. Also, I thought it was neat in that in 1991, DC decided to link all of its annuals together with a common theme. For my money, this is the first time that DC took the annuals from that year or that summer and gave them a common theme. Actually, of course, in this case, this was more than a common theme. This was actually a linked story. But following Armageddon 2001, there were the 1995 annuals, for instance, which all carried the year 1 theme. Those were annuals which presented stories about the characters' first year in their costume careers. There was the one Pulp Hero themed annual year. There was the Ape themed annual year. I think you can really trace that all back to Armageddon 2001. So a really neat premise behind just the publication of the storyline itself. Now, as for the story itself, and spoilers ahoy, folks, this is where I'm going to get talking about Armageddon 2001's first issue. The very story of Armageddon 2001 from the outset seemed like a really neat idea. At the start, it promised the emergence of a new hero into the pantheon of DC legends. And more than that, it also told of the coming of a new villain. Someone who I believe was supposed to be a villain who would have a very long shelf life. I'm thinking that with this story, the idea was that the character who would be known as the Monarch was supposed to be a villain who would, in short time, rank up there with Lex Luthor, the Joker, Darkseid, because you think about it, just as it is now, even back then, there were fans who were saying, yeah, Luthor, Joker, Darkseid, they're great, but wow, they get used a lot. Be kind of nice if we had another big bad to add into the mix. And so with Armageddon 2001, there were fans who were looking forward to seeing a new villain who could be an antagonist not just to one character, but to pretty well the entire DC hero community. So, again, let me get into a spoiler-filled synopsis of Armageddon 2001, issue number 1. The story begins in the year 2030, and we're introduced to a very dystopian future. Uh, our main character is a scientist named Matthew Ryder, last name spelled Ryder. Matthew Ryder is a scientist, and he comes across as a bit of a Jor-El type, in that he's very much a free thinker. He goes very much against convention. And in this dystopian future that we see, Matthew Ryder's idealism, his willingness to speak his thoughts freely, is something which can get him into a lot of trouble. In the year 2030, all of the superheroes, all of the metahumans are dead. And the world is ruled with an iron fist by a despot known only as the monarch. He is clad in a complete suit of armor, which appears to augment whatever powers he had naturally. No one has any idea who the monarch is. There are only two slits in his armored mask, which show that there are a pair of human eyes under the mask. As Ryder will later comment, the assumption is that the monarch is a male, but Ryder later reflects that the monarch's costume doesn't reveal his, or for that matter, her gender. No one knows where exactly the monarch came from. All that is known is that sometime in the year 2001, one of the heroes had a fall. He gave in to whatever negative emotions were plaguing him, whether they be grief, guilt, rage, jealousy, frustration. Those negative feelings caused this unnamed hero to take an epic downturn. And he will assume the monarch is a he from this point out. The monarch decided that conventional superhero methods were useless. They weren't nearly enough to stop the problems that were plaguing the world. They were not enough to effectively deal with villains such as the Joker and Lex Luthor. So somewhere in 2001, the person who would become the monarch decided to shed himself of his prior identity and design the monarch outfit, and then went about creating some form of technology that was able to destroy all metahumans on Earth and kill all of his one-time friends in the hero community. And so now the 2030 that we see in Armageddon 2001 is very much like the world in George Orwell's 1984. So people are constantly being watched. People have to be very careful what they say in public. People must always appear to be busying themselves, and they must appear to be busy in service to the monarch. So this is not a world that has been taken back to Stone Age levels in terms of technology and education. On the surface, this looks like what you would think would be a utopian society. It's very peaceful, it's very orderly. However, the people are living in fear of the monarch. In order to instill the sense that the monarch is watching everybody's every waking move and thought, there are statues of the monarch everywhere, on every block, at every bus stop, at every subway station. And Matthew Ryder is sick of it. Now, he could just go with what's been set down. He could follow the regime. He's actually married. He's got 2 children. His daughter is actually one of the quote-unquote peacekeepers whose mission is to patrol the community and take down any terrorist threat, even if it comes from an elderly person waiting for a subway train. But Matthew is somebody who wants to look into where exactly the monarch comes from, and given that he has an immense body of knowledge about quantum physics and time travel, Matthew thinks to himself, wouldn't it be neat if you could find a way to go into the past and kill the monarch before he becomes the monarch? And it turns out that the monarch is himself doing experiments in time travel. He's taken a variety of human test subjects, tried sending them back in time, but each test subject has died. And so Matthew Ryder, who's getting himself increasingly in trouble with the authorities, finally comes to the attention of Monarch. And Monarch actually entertains the idea of listening to Matthew Ryder, who says, listen, Monarch, the reason why the other test subjects died is because they don't have the determination. They don't have the strength of character. You have to find somebody who has that inner strength, who's able to endure the ravages of being sent into the time stream, and I'm the man for it. And the monarch actually agrees. Now, he threatens Matthew with all manner of death for his relatives if he goes astray of the monarch while traveling into the past. But in the end, Ryder is put into a time chamber. He's suited up and he is sent into the past. And as he is sent into the past, Matthew finds that he loses his humanity. He loses his very physical being, and he becomes a being of pure, living, temporal energy. And when he comes out of the time stream, he is primarily a gold and black suited character, and he takes on the name Wave Rider. And he makes it his mission in the year 1991, which is where he lands, to survey as many members of the DC hero community as possible in order to find out which one of them is a hero who takes that tragic fall and becomes the monarch. Something that Matthew discovers early on as the Wave Rider is that if he touches somebody, he can actually look into that person's timeline, and he can actually see a fair distance into their future. He can look at least a decade ahead in time. And so for Wave Rider, this timing is perfect because he's in the year 1991. According to the few historical records which are available, he knows that the monarch first appears in 2001. So by going through all the members of the DC hero community, he's going to be able to look into each one's personal timeline, figure out who becomes the monarch, and then his plan is to kill the hero on the spot. He has no qualms about taking a life so quick. So there you have a synopsis of the first issue of Armageddon 2001. I have to say, rereading the story, which was written by Archie Goodwin,